Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Desiree Solomon, and I will be your moderator for today's presentation titled Discovering the Cloud, What's the Forecast for Cloud-Based eDiscovery? This CLE webinar is accredited in Illinois and Missouri and is pending accreditation in California, Indiana, Minnesota, Texas, and Wisconsin. Now, before we get started, I'd like to cover just a couple items. One is that this presentation will run approximately 45 minutes. And the second is if you are viewing this program online and you are in a jurisdiction that has been approved for this CLE webinar, you'll receive your CLE certificates in about 2 weeks. If that's not the case, please do feel free to reach out to us, and we'll get those to you promptly. Now, before we get started, I do want to present our speaker and my colleague, Matthew Miner. He's BLUESTAR's General Counsel and Vice President of Staffing. Matthew currently runs BLUESTAR's Attorney Review Division, managing a team of over 350 attorneys locally with review projects all over the country. Plus, he has a network of over 12,000 attorneys nationally. He's been practicing for 16 years and has dedicated 10 of those years to large-scale electronic litigation consultation and project management. And he gained valuable experience as an attorney in the law firm setting with 3 years each as an attorney at Sibley Austin and Sun & Shine Nath and Rosenthal. We're so fortunate to have Matthew on board. So without further ado, I'd like to now hand over the presentation to Matthew. Matthew, it's all yours.
Thanks, Desiree. And thanks, everyone, for joining us today on a very interesting topic that has actually grown in importance with the explosion of data that we've seen these days in business and especially in litigation. What we found is over the years, in the last 12 years that I've been involved in large-scale eDiscovery, that the data sets have grown larger and larger, and the plaintiff's bar has gotten that much better at digging for and finding new data to request in their doc requests. I just recently saw a statistic that of the data that currently exists today, all the interactions, all the transactions that go on between business to business, interpersonal, whether it's email, internet transactions, what have you, or just day-to-day data that is accumulated. All the data that exists today, 90% of that data has been created in the last 2 years, which means that the 10% that remains is from everything the 2 years before that. So you can see the growth of data and the amount of information that's being passed around either between people or between companies and definitely on the internet shows that there's a lot of exposure and a lot of risk out there for people that also find themselves involved in litigation or in eDiscovery. Another statistic I saw actually just today was that in 2 days we worldwide create more data than was in existence from the beginning of electronic documents up to 2003. So every 2 days we're creating an unimaginable amount of data that has to be accounted for very often in discovery. So what do you do? How do you contain that much information? Big data has become so big that the only way we can contain it is in something, a container as large as something like the internet. And that's why we have cloud storage solutions that are becoming much more prevalent, very popular with large corporate entities to push that much data in an economical and efficient way. So cloud computing itself is really just the delivery of scalable IT resources over the internet. And what that really means is how do you get to that data? Well, usually on the cloud, it's through a web browser in a software as a service model. The web browser, it becomes the application. Essentially, using the browser as a thin client means the application runs through the browser. Then instead of loading something up on your desktop as a Windows program, as an example, all of that information, all of the application is housed and runs within that web browser. You can also do customizable applications in integrations such as in a platform as a service. A good example of that would be Salesforce, or specifically if you can actually use Salesforce's Force.com as a CRM online, they can customize that as well. So there's several examples of different types of cloud services that are available. Another one would be even larger scale, infrastructure as a service. That would be such as what Amazon S3 structure has been built out to attract large amounts of data from corporate clients, replacing on-the-ground IT services and storage solutions, pushing all of that data that would be behind the corporation's firewall into the structure that's been built out by Amazon or folks like Xerox or Google to basically give that end user the ability to access the economies of scale in terms of amount of savings that they can get for using that much storage. Well, what does it really look like? I mean, we get the question very often, well, you know, where is the cloud? Why is it such a vague term? We know what our local servers look like. They're usually very clean systems housed by and occupied by very smart people who know exactly how to make sure it runs smoothly. But what's the cloud look like? Where is it? Well, quite frankly, it looks exactly the same. It's just in a much larger structure run by fairly large companies who have sorted out all of the software, hardware, and personnel that's necessary to operate that big of a structure, that much storage capacity. It's really no different than what's behind your firewalls as either a law firm, a corporate entity, or what have you. It's just, since it's built so large, you get the ability to have that much more savings. Ultimately, you know, why we're talking today and why we also appreciate folks joining us on the CLE is, as attorneys, it's becoming more and more apparent that technology very often gets ahead of us, and we have to assist our clients in dealing with the tools and solutions that are available to them. And there's a lot of data out there that we talked about earlier, the explosion of data just in the last couple of years. More and more that data is being pushed into the cloud, which has its own issues in terms of how you deal with document retention, how do you get that data back down, if in case you do have some eDiscovery or litigation that you're exposed to. So as practitioners in the eDiscovery space or attorneys that are interested in information, it's important for us to be knowledgeable and be able to represent our clients to the best of our abilities, to know the technology that's out there, to know what the exposures and risks are, and to make sure that we stay on the right side of the rules of discovery to help them in their cases. Ultimately, the ABA also notes that we should maintain a requisite knowledge and skill to keep up with the practice of law, make sure that we understand technology, that we can best help our clients. So this is sort of a two birds with one stone situation. You're learning more about technology and you're getting those CLE credits that you folks need every year. So ultimately, is there any difference between terrestrial data, data that's on somebody's hard drive on their desktop or in somebody's shared server space, the corporate side, and data that resides in a remote cloud structure, say with Amazon S3? Under the federal rules, it's the responding parties that has the data in their possession, custody, and control that will put them on the hook for making sure they identify, preserve, and collect it appropriately during litigation. Federal courts time and time again have noted that even if that data is in the custody of a third party, the owner, the end user of that data is ultimately the party that's going to be responsible for identifying it, preserving it, ultimately producing it if relevant in their litigation. So just because it's in a remote location doesn't lessen your burden to preserve, maintain, and ultimately produce it if necessary and relevant. And who is using this data? You know, there's a lot of it out there, but ultimately, what's the adoption rate? how much more are we going to be dealing with this in litigation as companies adopt it? Well, which companies have adopted it so far? Well, about 40% of respondents in a PricewaterhouseCoopers survey noted that they've been using cloud services in 2012. As of May 2012, there were over 170 million users of Google Apps and Microsoft 365 users in the corporate setting. A lot of software has been moved off of corporate server space, out from behind the firewall, and been pushed into the cloud, leveraging the obviously impressive structure and infrastructure that Google and Microsoft have built with their apps and with their 365. The folks at Gartner, the folks that do a lot of study on technology and its effect on litigation and generally the use of information, have found that the folks that are using the cloud by 2015, they will see at least a 20% savings across all metrics just by using the cloud. There's that much more cost savings, especially when you're talking about that much data that's being generated on a daily basis by large corporate entities. And by the end of 2016, we're seeing the adoption rate go that much further, to have at least 50% of the global 1,000 companies in the cloud already. So 2 years ago, obviously this was something new. It was a terrific buzzword. Now this is commonplace, and because it's commonplace, we're going to see a lot more of this in our doc requests. We're going to see a lot more of plaintiffs' bar seeing that there is a target-rich environment for data to be collected in a situation that they think might be a difficult collection for the target of their doc request. Traditionally it would have been. We'll talk about some tools that will actually make it a lot easier to use the cloud and to leverage it in the eDiscovery space as well. And why is this scary to a lot of CIOs and corporate types who have large organizations and employees that are talking about bringing their own device to work? Well, we've heard a lot about bring your own device as a coming wave in terms of cost savings for organizations, and just knowing that the tablet PC or the tablet culture of using and consuming data via a tablet or a mobile device is going to be something that we deal with in the future. Even more so, what's on those tablets, what's on those devices that those employees are bringing to work, and what solutions are they using already with hardware that they already have at work. More than likely, you have employees, if you're a corporate entity, already using Gmail or Salesforce. You might be using Dropbox to move large amounts of data between people or between groups. You might have an HR department or a marketing department using SurveyMonkey. There's all sorts of things out there that your employees are probably already using, and maybe exposing you to having the need to collect that data later in eDiscovery. Even more so for corporations that have embraced the cloud structure. Well, they've put infrastructure and process as a service in place to actually move a lot of expensive hardware and software out from behind the corporate walls and push that into the much more cost-effective cloud structure. As we mentioned before, Microsoft 365, Google Apps have gotten tremendous footing and acceptance. Windows Azure is fast approaching as well as something that's starting to dominate in the corporate setting. Amazon Web Services, the S3, is actually a service that our company uses, and happy with it because of the cost effectiveness of it. The large amounts of data that we're able to push there and have it housed very, very inexpensively. So these are all areas where, very often your employees are already using it, and if they're not, it's fast approaching that they will be with the adoption of these services and solutions by their corporate entities. the last 18 months, what we've seen as far as adoption of the cloud by corporate entities has been mirrored by the doc requests that we've seen from the plaintiff side. We're seeing in labor and employment disputes either the plaintiffs and in some cases the defense side looking for online or email-based in the cloud, Gmail, Yahoo, or Hotmail. Definitely social media, Facebook and Twitter chief among them. Sometimes they just want to know exactly what employees are talking about amongst themselves. There was a recent case involving the EEOC and honey baked ham where that was an issue. File storage, as we mentioned before, more than likely you have some employees or even your IT department using a Dropbox, using a you send it to send large amounts of data that are too large to move via traditional email. And then we also saw that Google Apps and Microsoft 365 docs are now being requested directly in document requests. So these are the things that it's just the sort of the sharp end of the spear, but this is becoming much more commonplace now as we see more doc requests come in the door. Now this is very often an exciting time for folks that depending on which end of the doc request you're on, whether it's exciting or terrifying, we're all going to have to deal with it just because of the rapid rate of adoption of all of these solutions. Ultimately, enterprise solutions will one day replace most of the in-house office solutions. For now, these are largely the Google apps and the Microsoft 365s, but I mean, moving beyond the email that was sort of the thin edge of the wedge to get the cloud acceptable in large-scale organizations using Gmail or Yahoo on an enterprise basis is what really sparked a lot of corporations seeing that it is a viable alternative to having that information behind their own firewalls. A good example is Salesforce. Salesforce is probably the largest adopted specific use software in the cloud at this point. Salesforce is a terrific CRM tool for salespeople to track their information, and especially in the retail space. It's a terrific tool for large organizations to track the activities and leverage the contacts that their sales representatives make. There's thousands of applications that plug into it, and it's very customizable. The great thing about it is there's hardly any upfront cost with using it. There's no hardware or software that you have to plug into and purchase. It's just something that you sign up for and use online. So that's one of the more attractive parts of most cloud solutions. The cost of entry is very low. So let's talk about a few different concerns that people may have had, things that you need to look out for and be cognizant of what tools are available to help you. So we'll discuss data security, what you should be looking for in cloud contract terms when you do find a vendor that you'd like to engage. What sort of cost savings can you expect, and ultimately, what tools are going to make your life easier in dealing with this amount of data, but also staying on the right side of eDiscovery and making sure you're living up to best practices. Now, of course, last 2 years we've seen the number one concern for cloud data is data security. People very often get uncomfortable when their data isn't behind their firewall. They're concerned that they're not necessarily going to have the same level of security that they would expect with data that they control locally. Very early on, one of the biggest concerns with the cloud was data integrity and location. Where's my data actually being housed? Is it being housed in separate servers and separate locations? Am I exposing myself to different jurisdictions I don't necessarily want to? Do I have the ability to put the same protocols in place for backup and disaster recovery in place in the cloud as I have in my robust local systems? Do I have the ability to have the same doc retention and destruction policy? What's the level of encryption? How secure is it as it moves into the cloud and as it sits there? Is it reliable? Am I going to have any sort of business interruption based on not having access or having slow speeds to get to the data as it resides in the cloud. That goes with the slow up down speeds that a few years ago we had to deal with. Now we're talking about gigabit speeds moving data back and forth. So we are less concerned with that now. Probably the biggest hurdle to the cloud and its acceptance was the wait and see attitude that a lot of people have. It's actually, a couple years ago, was a fairly radical decision to want to move very sensitive data out from behind someone's firewall into somebody else's, essentially, into somebody else's structure, into somebody else's data center. Until large corporations started to move to the cloud, that wait and see approach was pretty strong in terms of holding people back. But as I said, the thin edge of the wedge really was the acceptance of online email. People seeing that Yahoo, Gmail could be used in a corporate setting and in a way that's secure enough that sensitive information and cost effectiveness were protected. Today, it's 18 months later, 2 years later, we've gotten a lot better at our cloud solutions, at our approaches. We've answered a lot of those concerns that people had, stopping them from seeing it as a viable alternative to having their data housed more expensively locally. Now, in terms of security, we can have HIPAA-compliant cloud structures, private cloud networks that only the end user has access to, with multi-layered security access points. Sometimes we can get down to even only having access to specific IP addresses. So only a certain person at a certain terminal can have access to certain data. Data centers themselves have matured to the point where they have impressive auditable security levels. All of the different certifications that you would expect. And the strongest firewall technology possible with an Amazon, with a Xerox, with a Google, and their setups. And the same backup disaster recovery, the same doc retention policies that you have locally, terrestrially, can be pushed and monitored and administered as that data resides in the cloud as well. So we have systems in place that can do the exact same things that the impressive folks with your IT department can do with the data locally. Speed and encryption, of course, are chief among the concerns previously. Data encryption is the norm. As we work with our friends at Amazon, their S3 structure, we have a 256-bit encryption for all of the data as it moves to and while it resides in the cloud structure for our private network clients. Very often what we tell people is the data is more secure as it moving into or residing in our cloud structure than it was sitting on someone's desktop. So, and that's been borne out with some of the security tear sheets and information that we can provide to our partners as well. The same access management that you have locally can also be pushed to the cloud structure as well. Identity and access management through multi-layered security, logins, and like I said, even down to recording and only giving access to specific IP addresses of specific terminals can be done as well. Also, probably most impressive and best for business continuity is the uptime. You're looking at 99.9% uptime with the largest cloud structures and very fast transfer speeds. Not the case a couple years ago. Speeds are through the roof at this point that they rival local networks in terms of the ability to get data quickly to the end user. So once you've gotten comfortable with the idea of the cloud, once you've convinced yourself and probably your CIO that this is something that your company should explore, and you've decided to engage a cloud service provider, well, what can you do to protect yourself in that engagement? What should you be looking for in your cloud contracts that protect you and your information? Well, one of the things, obviously, that should be spelled out and clearly under the federal rules, since the ownership of the data still resides with you. We always put in language stating explicitly that ownership and custody and control of that data resides with the end user, resides with the person paying for and using that storage, not the cloud provider themselves. We make that very explicit in all of our contract language. Even more explicit is what happens when your cloud provider gets a subpoena. God forbid somebody from a government agency drops a subpoena on a third-party cloud provider and they don't give you the notice that you need to either defend or try to quash that subpoena. Make sure that within the language of your service contract with that cloud provider that they give you as quick notice as possible under the law to be able to answer or challenge that subpoena. There may be the rare occasion where if it is a criminal investigation that they may be foreclosed from giving you the fastest notification possible, subject to either their liability themselves. More than likely that's not going to be the case. Make sure you have written in their language that says that as quick as possible they give you the information that your data is the subject of an investigation. We've had a question recently while giving this CLE about, well, when does the duty to preserve attach when somebody is given a subpoena, whether it's a government entity or it's another party in a litigation in the civil sense. From what I've seen and from what I've gathered in my experience with the different jurisdictions that we've seen, we're seeing that that duty to preserve has been attached only when the end user of that cloud data storage has been notified, not when the cloud provider has been subpoenaed. And it's been for this reason. One, more than likely your cloud provider doesn't have anything to do with your doc retention and destruction policy. That is more than likely left to the end user to administer. So until that end user receives notice or receives that subpoena, more than likely that doc retention and destruction policy is ongoing. And until it's affirmatively stopped with notice, with appropriate notice, then that data will be secure. You won't be exposing it to spoliation. But it's only up until the point that the end user, the actual owner of that data, has been notified that that duty to preserve will attach. Now, another issue that we saw early on, and especially with the early cloud, with a widely distributed network of server space where data was parceled out and stored in various locations. The question of where is your data located became a very big concern for folks. Not just for the practical aspects of where it's located in terms of speed of access, but from a legal standpoint, are you exposing yourself to a jurisdiction you don't want to defend in? So as much as possible, we try to keep data that's been collected and stored, we try to keep that data local as much as possible. We don't try to have that data move cross-border and expose ourselves to, especially in the European market, issues with moving data outside privacy laws that we find on the continent in Europe. That's why we work with cloud providers that have local nodes, local storage nodes. So as much as possible, we try to keep that data local and give access to it remotely. And that's why using the cloud can be very effective for, obviously, large corporate clients that have multinational presences, but also have multinational litigation as well. So if you have a corporation with information that's going to be interesting to the folks in the U.S. Defending a case for information that resides in France, well, we can actually house that data there and stay on the right side of their privacy laws. So as much as possible, we're sensitive to local privacy laws, and more importantly, we want to make sure that you're not exposing yourself to a jurisdiction that you have no intention of defending. Try to keep your data local as much as possible for jurisdiction purposes. Now, the biggest driver, more than likely for the cloud, is cost effectiveness. Why has there been such a terrific adoption rate of the cloud in the last 2 years? Is because it's just that much cheaper to have your data in that large structure. The economy of scale created by having that much bandwidth, that much storage capacity in one place. The biggest savings that you can find with the cloud really is the low cost of operation. There's almost no cost of entry into getting into the cloud. Instead of buying, or even worse, building software in-house with all the associated costs of hardware, support, maintenance, associated staffing, that you can just rent that software essentially using the cloud structure. Everything remains in the cloud, and all you need to do is log in through your browser, through that thin client we talked about earlier. Salesforce, as we said, was the example we gave earlier. Instead of installing that CRM locally and buying the software and having the hardware necessary for that, getting the patches and buying servers and having people maintain that and depreciate all that hardware, well, you just sign up for Salesforce.com and you get a monthly rental fee essentially. There's not a single dime of infrastructure investment related to it. Ultimately, it's faster as well. Beyond the cost savings, it's also very fast. So you're not having any sort of business continuity issues with getting to this data. If the data stay in the cloud, the bandwidth for moving it within the cloud, at least in the S3 platform that we've seen with Amazon, it's phenomenally fast. So we've talked a lot about what you're exposed to either as a large corporate entity or folks that are involved in litigation, that there may be some data that you need to deal with as it resides in the cloud. Certainly with the adoption rate that we've seen on the corporate side, more and more data is going to be attacked as it sits in the cloud for eDiscovery purposes. So knowing that we're going to have a duty to preserve it, produce it, deal with it, are there tools available to help us to actually make that process more cost effective? Are there tools that we can use in the cloud for eDiscovery purposes to actually lower people's litigation spend? And the answer is actually yes. There's quite a bit of tools and support out there that you can use for collection, processing, the hosting and storage of that data, the review of it, and ultimately be able to produce it as it resides in the cloud. So, of course, we're worried about dealing with all the data that could reside in the cloud. Now we can actually leverage that cloud to lower our costs for eDiscovery purposes as well. What we've done is we've actually put together a workflow that, as the data is remotely gathered and collected using a couple of different tools, one of which is called eCloud Collect by a partner of ours, Cumulus Data, or via FTP connection, we can remotely get data from a desktop, laptop, shared server space, or even from the cloud itself, from Gmail or Yahoo accounts for email, or for other storage or social media. We can collect that data remotely and then push it into a cloud structure so that our clients can cost effectively host that data for essentially probably 10% of what they would spend normally locally. So once we have that data collected, we can actually push it into the cloud, have our processing engines within the cloud itself, the data stays there, and then we can process and call that data down to the most relevant data set using keywords or analytics, and then push that into a hosting platform for a review. Once we have it there, we can have people remotely access it like they would any other tool, such as a relativity, or in our case, we use concordance evolution or reveal in control. And ultimately, once we've reviewed that data, either through outside counsel or through attorney reviewers, we can produce that data from the cloud as well. Just pushing that data down as an ISO or actually pushing it out and burning it to media as we normally would. But the great thing is, throughout this whole process, the data hasn't moved. The data resides in a secure setting that has limited access to whoever you want it to go to, whether it's outside counsel, whether it's in-house counsel doing triage to see if it's a case that should be defended for early case assessment purposes, or if you want to leverage and have more boots on the ground, you can give outside counsel access and attorney reviewers access to it as well. So all the while leveraging the most cost-effective hosting environment possible. One of the biggest issues with dealing with the cloud, and what we found in the eDiscovery space, is the ability to collect data from it. It's, once it's in the cloud, it's very cost effective for it to sit there, but sometimes it's a bear to get out. So what we've done is actually developed a tool called eCloud Collect that can remotely plug into cloud structures such as remote email access via Microsoft Exchange, Yahoo, Google, Gmail, that sort of thing, and also being able to plug into and remotely collect data from people's desktops, from remote shared servers, from Exchange servers that are situated locally, and be able to collect them remotely without actually being on site. And where's the cost savings there is, well, there's no hardware involved, there's no software, and more importantly, there's no travel. You're not having somebody interrupt somebody's business day by looking over their shoulder and collecting their data directly. It's much less intrusive and can be driven by your corporate IT team themselves. So at the direction of in-house counsel, your IT folks can actually remotely get to this data, especially in situations where you have employees in the field that you don't necessarily want to bring back their hardware and have that interruption in their productivity. The other great thing is you're essentially given the ability to collect 24/7, 365 days a year. It kicks off and starts at your whim. The other nice thing is if there is an interruption, if an employee actually has to unplug at some point, this collection tool actually picks right back up from there, from that point. And it's all done forensically. Complete reporting, complete error reporting on files that have corruption issues, all of the things that you would expect a forensic collection to include is part of this process. The biggest driver for this, and certainly where we're getting the biggest savings, is the savings of time and money. And a classic collection, and in this example, what we're talking about is a collection of 30 custodians in 3 cities, including 2 shared server spaces. For a classic, traditional on-the-ground, we'll send forensic experts or the IT folks have to go out and collect this data. More than likely, it's going to take about a week to get that started. You're going to have travel expenses, shipping expenses to get those hardware, those hard drives back and forth, and the fear that it could happen that those hard drives might get lost in FedEx or UPS. Also, the collection fees themselves for your collection experts to go on site, and the consulting fees of getting up to speed just to set this whole thing up. Around about 4 weeks you're looking at for that kind of collection. With eCloud Collect, we can do that for just shy of $17,000 at 68% savings. More importantly, we can turn that around in about 7 days. Why is that important? It's important because you're able to get that data that much quicker in front of the people who need to see it, in front of the partner who is advising their client, in front of the in-house counsel whose duty it is to decide whether they should litigate this case or if this case is ripe for settlement. So the faster you can do early case assessment, the more effective it can be. So instead of having a $52,000 4-week project, you have a week's turnaround for about $17,000, and the peace of mind knowing that you've got that data in hand and are being as responsive as possible to that litigation at that point. And once you've gotten past the collection side, there are tools in place, and as I said, we're able to collect, process, review, and produce from the cloud using our partnerships with both LexisNexis through Concordance Evolution, through eCloud Collect with Cumulus Data, and with Reveal and Control, another review platform. We also process with LexisNexis Law program as well, or their Law Suite. So we can also perform early case assessment with their tools as well. So all of these things, traditionally, what you'd be looking at for a terabyte of data with traditional collection costs of about 50 custodians, $75,000, whether you want it TIFFed or processed for native review, and the hosting, not even including the seats for reviewers. For a terabyte of data, traditionally costed out, you're looking at anywhere from about $280,000 to a little over $600,000 just to deal with that terabyte of data. By leveraging the solutions that we have in the cloud, the cost effectiveness of lower hosting costs, leveraging the resources we have with our partnerships with LexisNexis, with Reveal and Control, with Cumulus Data, we're actually able to bring that cost down to about $90,000 for that terabyte of data, on 85% savings, just by leveraging that workflow we talked about and gaining the resources of using that very cheap cloud-hosted structure in a private network for our clients. So ultimately, we talked about it a lot, and I do appreciate the time you spent with us today. It's an important time for us, and as I said, it's either very exciting or very terrifying for you, depending on which end of the doc request you are, or you find yourself on. There's a lot of different solutions out there, whether it's software as a solution, infrastructure, or even at the larger scale end for our corporate clients, pushing entire business processes into a cloud structure. And what do you need to know? You have to stay up to speed with the technology that's quickly changing. It's changing as fast as the data is expanding. And ultimately, we're all going to be exposed to this area in our litigation going forward, especially if we have any exposure to eDiscovery. But make sure your clients are protected. Make sure your corporations are protected by having the security and the contract language. And more importantly, making sure you have best practices. Now that this process allows you to have much more cost-effective approaches, there's no excuse not to have best practices. You can have the ability to have co-locations as they reside in the cloud. You can have the ability to make sure that you have good document retention and destruction policy. You can standardize your processes as they reside in the cloud across your business units. And ultimately, are there tools available out there for you? And certainly we think the workflow that has been built out with our partners is something that can be very effective in dealing with large-scale litigation in the eDiscovery space. I want to thank you for all of your attention today. If you have any questions whatsoever, by all means, feel free to reach out to us, and we look forward to talking with you.
Thank you, Matthew. Again, I'd like to reiterate your CLE certificates will be mailed out within the next couple of weeks if, in fact, you are in a jurisdiction where this CLE has been approved. And like Matthew said, please do feel free to reach